The day my husband was buried, his children tried to bury me too. 3 days after the funeral, they sat across from me in my late husband's office and calmly explained that I would lose my home, our vacation property, and nearly everything we had built together over 22 years of marriage. They thought I would cry, beg, and eventually accept whatever scraps they decided to leave behind. What they did not realize was that my husband had already planned for their greed long before he died. My name is Claire, and for 22 years, I was married to a successful businessman named Richard. We built a life together that I believed was founded on trust, loyalty, and love. When Richard became seriously ill, I devoted every waking hour to caring for him. I drove him to appointments, sat beside his hospital bed, managed his medications, and stayed awake through countless sleepless nights. Meanwhile, his 2 sons, Mason and Tyler, were nowhere to be found. They appeared when it was convenient, they attended the funeral. They delivered emotional speeches, they shook hands and accepted condolences. But during the months when their father truly needed them, they were absent. 3 days after we buried Richard, they arrived at the house with legal documents. Mason, the older brother, spoke first. He carried himself like a man who already owned everything in the room. Tyler stood beside him wearing a fake expression of concern that felt even worse. They explained that according to the will, the family home would belong to them. The lake house would belong to them. The business interests would belong to them. Nearly every valuable asset Richard owned would be transferred directly into their hands. Then I asked the question that mattered. What about me? Tyler smiled politely and informed me that I would receive $200,000 from a life insurance policy. According to him, that amount should be more than enough for a woman my age. I felt like I had been slapped. After 22 years of marriage, after sacrificing my own career to support Richard and his family, they believed I was worth a small insurance check and 30 days to move out of my home. Then came the final blow. They claimed Richard had accumulated $180,000 in medical debt during his illness, that the responsibility for those bills would fall entirely on me. By the time they finished explaining everything, I would be left with almost nothing. When they finally left, they looked satisfied. They believed they had won. I sat alone in Richard's office, staring at the life we had built together. That was when I discovered something strange hidden inside his desk. It was a small brass key. At first, it seemed insignificant, but Richard never did anything without a reason. The next morning, I met with an attorney who urged me to challenge the will. He believed something about the documents felt wrong. He warned me not to sign anything. He begged me to fight. Instead, I surprised him. I told him I was ready to give Richard's sons everything they wanted. Even he thought I had lost my mind. The truth was that I could not explain the feeling growing inside me. Something told me Richard had left me more than a key. He had left me a message. After searching for 2 days, I finally discovered what the key opened. A private safety deposit box. Inside were documents that changed everything. There were emails between Mason and Tyler discussing Richard's declining health months before his death. They spoke openly about taking control of his assets. They discussed legal strategies and hidden transfers. Worst of all, they referred to me as an obstacle that would be easy to remove once Richard was gone. I felt sick reading their words, but the deeper I looked, the worse it became. Richard had secretly hired investigators before his death. Their reports revealed that Mason was drowning in gambling debt and Tyler had lost huge amounts of money through questionable investment schemes. Both men were desperate for cash. Then I discovered the truth that made my hands shake. Richard had secretly moved millions of dollars into protected accounts only I could access. The house his sons wanted so badly was loaded with debt. The lake property was loaded with debt. The business was burdened with debt. The inheritance they believed would make them rich was actually a financial trap. Finally, I opened a sealed letter written by Richard himself. As I read his words, tears filled my eyes. He explained that he had uncovered his son's plans months before his death. He knew they intended to manipulate his estate and leave me with nothing, so he created a plan of his own. He transferred assets. He documented evidence. He protected me. Most importantly, he created a newer will that his sons knew nothing about. That will left everything to me. Everything. Richard's final message was simple. They made their choices. Now let them live with the consequences. A few days later, Mason and Tyler invited me to dinner. They thought they were celebrating their victory. The entire evening they talked about property transfers, legal paperwork, and future plans. I smiled through every conversation. Meanwhile, I already knew the truth. When I casually mentioned finding financial documents and a safety deposit box, panic flashed across both of their faces. For the first time, I saw fear. The following morning, I met with the attorney handling Richard's real estate strategy. He showed me every document. The evidence against the brothers was overwhelming. There were records of fraud, forged signatures, financial manipulation, even proof that they had attempted to exploit their dying father. I was given a choice. I could send them to prison, or I could allow Richard's plan to unfold exactly as he intended. A week later, we all gathered for the final estate meeting. Mason arrived confident. Tyler arrived smiling. Both men expected to walk out as wealthy heirs. Instead, they watched their entire future collapse. The real will was presented. The hidden accounts were revealed. The debt attached to the properties was explained. The room went completely silent. For the first time since Richard died, neither brother had anything to say. Then I handed them the documents. I was willing to transfer ownership of the properties to them. They looked relieved for exactly 3 seconds. Then they noticed the mortgages. The debt exceeded the value of the properties. Accepting the inheritance would leave them hundreds of thousands of dollars underwater. Refusing the inheritance would leave them with nothing. And if they tried to fight, evidence of their misconduct could trigger criminal investigations. The confidence disappeared from their faces. The arrogance vanished. The entitlement vanished. All that remained was panic. Eventually they signed, not because they wanted to, because they had no choice. As they left the conference room, I realized something important. For years, they had treated me like an outsider, a temporary part of the family, someone who could be ignored once their father was gone. But in the end, I was the only person Richard truly trusted. 3 months later, I moved into a beautiful coastal home overlooking the ocean. The money Richard protected ensured I would never worry about security again. Mason eventually declared bankruptcy. Tyler lost his business. Their lives unraveled under the weight of the choices they had made. As for me, I finally began living for myself. I planted gardens, made new friends, started volunteering, and eventually created a foundation that helps victims of financial abuse rebuild their lives. Looking back now, I understand that Richard's greatest gift was not the money. It was the lesson. Greed has a way of revealing people's true character. Mason and Tyler thought they were taking everything from me. What they never realized was that their father had already seen exactly who they were. And by the time they understood the game he had been playing, it was far too late. They thought they were inheriting a fortune. Instead, they inherited the consequences of their own actions.